Yeah, the parent trap, accommodating working parents in the games industry. We're going to be talking all about how to look after our parents. But to start with, I'm going to do a bit of an intro. So, hi, my name's Jo. I'm a game designer. I've been in the industry for 13 years now. These are some of the things that I've done in my career, mostly sort of non-traditional, non-gamer type games, lots of family games, multiplayer games, party games and mobile games and all sorts of things like that. This is what I do now. I work at a company called Snapfingerclick. We're an indie developer. We're very small. Most of us met at previous places where we worked together, and we tried to set up a place that's a little bit different. And we make games, party games that you can play together, but you can also play them over Twitch. So we've got like interactive features, which is lots of fun. So I'm a mum. I became a mum in 2018, and I learned a lot about what it's like to be a mum in the games industry. And I think it opened my eyes to a lot of how the games industry is and how it treats parents, and how there's a lot more that we could be doing. Before I became a mother, I think I was a bit naive about it. I think I just thought, it's going to be fine. I'll just go back to work. I'm going to be like, yeah, I can have it all. I can do it all. It's going to be fine. There are a lot of things that I didn't really think about until I was actually in that situation. Just things like simple things like just time off to recover. I didn't realize that it would, it's different for everyone, of course, but you do need that time just to rest and get over childbirth. It's quite a big deal. I didn't realize that my daughter would be just that dependent on me in those first few months of life. I was breastfeeding her, so I physically couldn't leave her for the first 4 months. She didn't take a bottle, unfortunately, at all, so I couldn't even pump and feed her via the bottle. There was just no way that I could leave her for anything more than about an hour for the first 4 months of her life until she was able to drink from a cup. So I really couldn't have done much at all. I had to just be there for her the whole time. And it's very common for, particularly for women, it's an issue that affects them the most, because they typically do tend to become the primary caregivers. It's 84% of mothers tend to be the primary caregiver. So I actually did a version of this talk last year, and this was generally for more women in tech. So I pulled some stats at the beginning of last year. So this is more for women in tech in general, but obviously does apply to the games industry as well as being part of the wider tech industry. So just to talk you through these stats, because I think they're really interesting. So 82% of women in the UK over 40 are mothers. So that tells us that a lot of women do go on to be mothers. Of course, not all of them do, but many of them do. A very high percentage of them do. So this is an important issue that does affect a lot of us. 49%, pretty much half of the workforce are women. So again, it's a big issue. Only 19% of tech jobs are held by women. We don't need to talk about this one much, because I know people know this is a problem. We're working on fixing it, but that does say something about the tech industry in general. Why do we not have more women? Are there things that we can do better to help support women? 56% of women in tech leave the industry mid-career. That's more than half. That's really sad. Women aren't sticking around. Why is that? Is that because they get to a point in their life where they want to start a family and the tech industry is just not the right one for them? And this is the saddest one. 30% of women in tech over 35 are still in junior roles, compared to 5% of men. So the women that are sticking around are clearly not progressing as much as men are. And why is that? Is that because they aren't able to work full-time? They're not able to work part-time and progress in those roles. They're having to take on lesser roles. There's probably lots of complex reasons for this, but perhaps parenting is one of those ones that contributes to it. This is from a survey that GDC do every year. This is from last year, but it might have changed a bit this year, I don't know. But this is very typical of what I know of the games industry, that it's not typically an industry that people tend to stay in for a very long time. And I know that anecdotally, a lot of people that I've worked with over the years have left to become parents. Both men and women have gone on to other places that just make their lives just a little bit easier when they're a parent, that aren't so geared around a culture of young people that don't have commitments outside of work. And it is an industry that is largely sustained by young people. why aren't we retaining these people? We should be retaining these people because these are our most experienced people and we should be valuing them. So when I joined the games industry back in 2008, there wasn't many women. It was only 4%. It's a lot better now. But what I find interesting about that is that I feel like we're approaching a point where there's going to be great change in the industry, because my sort of generation are kind of having babies now, and we've got a lot of women who've joined since I've joined who are obviously going to approach that point in their lives within the next few years. So this is a problem that we need to address really soon. A lot of the women that I've worked with over the years, I have seen so many of them leave the industry, not just women, men too, but women, it has become a more sort of immediate problem. A lot of the women I work with left when they got pregnant. They just didn't come back because their requests for flexible work were refused. With the men, it was more of a slower process, but I've seen men leave as well, just because they're sick of not seeing their kids, or they just want a job that just gives them more benefits. I realized that when I had my daughter, I hadn't felt at a point in my career where I could have done it until I was working for an indie dev where I was in a senior role and had the opportunity to actually sort of shape our policies and our working practices. I think back to my previous jobs and I just can't think how I could have made them work. Both of the companies I worked for before my current one were very sort of strict 9-to-5 places. There was no real option to kind of flexible work, and maybe I could have negotiated that, but I didn't feel comfortable to do so. One of the jobs I had was in London, commuting from Brighton. I have no idea how I could have made that work with a child, because nurseries are only open from 8 till 6, and I didn't get back from that job until 7:30 on a good day. So I just don't even know how it would have been possible. It's still kind of baffling to me, and I feel like that's a huge problem. And the fact that I only felt in a position where I could do this simply because I work at a smaller studio where I've got more of a say in what happens, that's a problem. So kind of already said this on the previous slide, but yeah, going indie has given me that opportunity to make a better company, if you will. And I've come to these kind of realizations that a good studio that supports working parents, they do all of these things. They support the staff right from the beginning of their parenting journey, and that's even before anybody's pregnant or anything else. The journey to becoming a parent starts before all of that, and a good studio can offer support at that point. Accommodating the needs of pregnant and breastfeeding staff, that's kind of an obvious one, but there's a lot of things I think even companies would be surprised that they should be doing and maybe aren't doing. Being more generous with time off and understanding all those reasons that you might need to be able to take time off, both paid and unpaid. And of course, letting parents work flexibly, because picking up the kids around work, if you can move your hours around, if you can do different hours, then that gives you a lot more opportunity to be a parent and still maintain your career. I'm going to do a little bit of a warning here, because I'm going to very, very briefly discuss pregnancy loss and fertility. I know these are really upsetting issues, so if anybody wants to step away from a couple of minutes, please do. I'm not going to be going into any specific stories, just really high level, but if you want to step away for 5 minutes, then please do so now, and I'll give you that moment if you want to do that. So let's start at the beginning. Before we even have a pregnancy or a child or anything, these are some of the basic rights to time off for pre-pregnancy. So you may need to take time off before there's a child, and that might be for things like fertility treatment and investigations. It may be for adoptions and surrogacy and fostering. If you have not yet matched with a child for adoption or a surrogate mother, then you're not actually legally entitled to any time off. You may be able to get time off if you ask. You may be able to get fertility treatment treated as a medical appointment, but there's no guarantee of that. Companies don't even have to pay you for medical appointments. It depends what's in your contract. So your rights for this stuff is pretty bare as your basic rights. Sadly, for pregnancy loss, if there's a pregnancy loss before 24 weeks, you're also not entitled to any time off as standard. Only if it's after 24 weeks, then maternity and paternity leave can be claimed. but not before 24 weeks. And again, you may be able to get time off as sick leave or compassionate leave, but again, there are no guarantees. So what a company can do, and this is such a simple thing, and I really believe that a lot of companies just haven't thought about it, is to offer some time off for these things. So 2 weeks of paid leave for any form of pregnancy loss, for anything relating to fertilities, including investigations, treatments, and recovery time, and for anything involving meetings for adoption, surrogacy, fostering, and setting all of that up. And of course, to remember, that's not just the mother, that's for both partners and for any surrogacy arrangements as well, because that's going to involve usually more than 2 people. It's going to involve 3 people. So the wording of that needs to kind of cover those things. But to me, this seems like a generous and very simple thing you can do. It just makes something that can be quite difficult for people just a little bit easier. And it's only 2 weeks, it's not very much. And I think most companies, if this is brought to their attention, I think they would happily adopt these policies. So moving on to pregnancy. Interestingly, pregnant people are fairly well protected by a lot of rights. Things like when you become pregnant, the company is obliged to perform a sort of risk assessment, a health and safety kind of assessment, to make sure that there's nothing in their everyday work that could affect or harm the pregnancy. Obviously, in games, we don't really tend to work with dangerous equipment and things like that, but there are still things that are relevant to us. Stuff like your setup, your desk, you might need a different chair, something that gives you better back support, those kind of things. The environment itself also counts. So things like noisy environments or stressful environments, things that might affect the way you're feeling kind of mentally, that also matters. And potentially work hours as well. Long hours can be quite tough when you're pregnant. And if basically, if any of these things fail, then the pregnant person is entitled to be placed on paid leave until the employer has kind of sorted all these things out. All companies are required to provide a separate space for a pregnant person to rest and lie down. So that can be just a meeting room or a first aid room or somewhere like that, but it needs to be somewhere that you can go and not be disturbed and just take a break, essentially. Anything relating to antenatal care, you are entitled to get paid time off for, and that might include things that you wouldn't expect, things actually like maybe parenting classes or exercising as well, if a doctor has recommended. So for example, if a doctor has said, you should go swimming or do pregnancy yoga or something like that, then employers are actually obliged to give you that time off to go to it if there's no way you can kind of fit it around outside of work. And any sick leave relating to pregnancy has to be paid. So I think most companies and games do tend to pay sick leave anyway, but it's not a requirement, but they have to when it's an illness relating to pregnancy. But if you are ill and it's not related to your pregnancy, then it's still not covered by that. But so you've got some decent pregnancy rights there, and it's good to know these things. I think some companies aren't always aware of these things. So I, for example, didn't know about the lie down thing when I was pregnant, which would have been really quite handy. But there are other things that companies can do just to make the life of their pregnant staff a little bit easier. Most pregnant people, they do want to just carry on working. They don't want to kind of become a burden or give up work. They would like to just be treated like normal people for the most part. It's just sometimes they just need a little bit of extra help, a little bit of additional support. One of the things that I would have found quite useful, I think, was the flexibility with the work hours, because I started coming in early when I was pregnant because of the sickness, because I had quite bad morning sickness and I really didn't want to be sick in front of anybody. And for some reason, my kind of nausea was always happening while I was on the train or walking to work with other people. So I tried to avoid people in the morning and got there a little bit early and then got some breakfast and kind of waited until it all settled down. But equally, I could have come in a bit later. I could have just come in like a little bit after everybody when the sickness had died down and not having to sort of get up a bit earlier to deal with that. So those kind of things can really help. Also, generally reducing your hours, going part-time or working from home. I used to get very tired in the afternoons. I can remember that quite well. So you know, if people want to go home early, take a break in the middle of the day, or make use of that rest space, actually maybe even have a little sleep in that rest space if they feel comfortable to do that. Just companies letting people know that's okay. You know, it's not a big deal, and, you know, just whatever they need, basically, whatever they can do to help. At the end of the pregnancy, of course, is going to transition to maternity leave. People may change their mind. You know, they might think, I want to work right up to the due date, and then they might feel, actually, you know what, I'm going to go off a month early. You are entitled to go on maternity leave before the baby is born. You don't have to work right up to the due date. Most midwives actually recommend trying to sort of not work right up to the due date, but a lot of women tend to do it because they want to sort of have as much leave as possible after the due date, so they just kind of keep working right to the end. But, you know, it's nice if you can kind of wind down. What I did and what I agreed with my company was to start taking the mornings off towards the last sort of 2 weeks before my due date, because I was getting very tired, very uncomfortable. I couldn't sit down. My back was hurting. I just decided that I would go swimming each morning to try and kind of help with that. And it was just a nice kind of gradual wind down, and just a nice sort of transition out of work, gradually ramping everything down, and not feeling stressed or worried that I've got sort of things hanging in the air, as it were. So maternity and paternity leave, these are your basic rights. So you can take up to 52 weeks off on maternity leave, and you have to take a minimum of 2 weeks. That's required. Not sure why you would want to come back before 2 weeks anyway, but you do have to take a minimum of 2 weeks just to recover. The statutory maternity pay, you can take up to 39 weeks. The first 6 weeks, you'll get 90% of whatever your average weekly earnings are. After that, I mean, this changes with inflation and things, but at the moment, it's about £150 a week, and then you can claim that for the next 33 weeks. Maternity leave doesn't just apply to the pregnant person. It will also, I mean, it's called something slightly different, but broadly the rules are the same. If you're adopting or getting a child through surrogacy, you nominate a primary parent, and they essentially take the maternity leave. So all of those rules are broadly the same for that. For paternity, you can take 1 or 2 weeks off. You actually aren't entitled to paternity at full pay as a basic right, although I know most companies do tend to do it because it's only a couple of weeks, but your basic right is only to get about £150 a week. And you can't take paternity before birth, but you can take it a little bit after if you want, but it has to be within 56 days. And again, this may be applying to a secondary parent in an adoption or surrogacy arrangement. So yeah, I mean, the basic packages are pretty, they're not very affordable for a lot of people. So it's good to do a generous package. I think in the games industry, who probably save so much money from not having to pay maternity very often, can at least afford to give something a bit more generous than this. So an example of a decent package would be to give 6 months on full pay, and then they can move to the statutory after 6 months if they want to be off a bit longer than that. Of course, some people choose to come back after 6 months. And to give at least 4 weeks for paternity. I mean, that's what we do at Snap Finger Quick. 2 weeks is not very much. I think you're just getting to grips with things after a couple of weeks. If you're a brand new parent, it's nice to give at least 2 more weeks just to enjoy baby before you go back. And of course, all on full pay on paternity. Parental leave is the dream. This is something that a lot of companies are starting to open up to. I've noticed outside the games industry, other companies are very competitive generally on this, and that might explain why a lot of people do leave the games industry. But Aviva, for example, do equal parental leave, where either parent can take up to 12 months off, 6 months on full pay, even if both of them work there. So, and that's a really nice thing to offer. So obviously, I know smaller companies would worry about the cost of that, but it would be a great benefit. And I think if a company can afford it, that's something that would be very, very useful to a lot of parents. I know a lot of dads that I speak to wish they could take more time off. They don't feel like they can ask. So I actually looked at Aviva's stats, and it said that 84% of the fathers who work for them take advantage of at least 6 months of this benefit. So it's a very popular benefit. So definitely something to consider. And I would love to see the games industry move towards this. So when you come back to work, there's a few things to consider. Your rights for coming back off of maternity leave, you can accrue holiday. You can also accrue public holidays because you don't obviously really get them when you're on maternity leave. So whatever your normal amount of leave through holiday and public holidays you get for the year, if you've taken, say, 12 months off, then you'll accrue all of that, and you can tack that onto the end of your maternity leave as well. You can actually do this in quite creative ways too. Like, for example, if you were full-time when you went on maternity leave and you've accrued 30 days of leave, and then you go part-time when you come back, so say doing 3 days a week, then you could spread out those 30 days to be another 10 weeks off, for example. So there's lots of little tricks you can do with those holidays that you accrue. So it's useful to know that. Kit days, again, like, my company weren't aware of kit days until we researched it, but these are actually really interesting things to do. These are optional, you don't have to do them, but a kit day, keep in touch, is where the person on maternity leave and the company just kind of catch up with each other, really. It can just be a meeting, just a chat, or it can be an opportunity to actually do some work as well. But again, it's optional, both parties have to agree, so these aren't a requirement. You have the right to return to the role you left if you return within 6 months. If it's more than 6 months, the company doesn't legally have to keep your exact role open, but they do need to give you something kind of similar, but they don't legally have to keep the exact position open for you. So how can we do better than this? Well, I think kit days are a great thing, actually, and companies should make more of them, because I know for me, working is a big part of my identity. And certainly when you become a mother and everything just completely changes, you start to not feel, I had days where I just didn't feel like myself at all. And I missed working. I really sometimes just felt left out, and I wanted to do something useful. So being able to have those kit days and actually do a bit of work and contribute something towards the company, I found that really valuable. I felt like I was still useful and needed, and it also just helped ease me back into work as well. I see no reason why you can't just keep the job open for 12 months. If you can keep it open for 6 months, you can keep it open for 12 months. You can arrange maternity cover. So there's really no kind of excuse for that. So it would be nice if companies just put a kind of cast iron guarantee for that. If you are recruiting maternity cover, I think it's really nice and really important to let the person who's going on maternity leave be involved in that process, help to recruit that person, have a handover period and another handover period when they come back. Because, again, it's like, you don't want to feel like you've been replaced, or that, you've been left out. And involving that person in this process, it just helps that run a bit smoother. Being a mum, being sleep deprived, all sorts of emotions go on there. So anything you can do to help with that is really useful. And of course, be prepared for things to change, because, as I said at the beginning, I had all these thoughts about what I was going to do when I became a mum, and that just completely went out the window when I actually had a child. I just didn't really know what to expect. People might say, oh, I'll be back after 6 months, and then realize I can't. I'm still breastfeeding, I don't feel comfortable. Someone who goes on maternity leave might be adamant that they're going to come back full time and it's all going to be fine, and then actually no, they want to do part time. Or maybe their circumstances have changed. Maybe they thought they had a support network close by, but then they've had, that's broken down. Lots of things can change. So it's good for the company to be prepared for that, to be ready, to be flexible, get in touch with that person, a couple of months beforehand, see how they're feeling, see what's going on, and just be ready to help with whatever they need when they come back. So I'm going to talk a bit about breastfeeding. So it'll obviously be very common for someone who's been on maternity leave to come back and still be breastfeeding their child. They may wish to be pumping at work. It's important, if you've never breastfed before, then it's important to sort of understand that it can vary so much depending on how old your baby is, how much they breastfeed, whether it's a combination or not. Even just like nature, every woman is different, and sometimes you've got your boobs full of milk and sometimes you haven't, and it's just, nobody knows. So it's hard to say how much time would need to be spent breastfeeding. Some might only need 1 break per day, some might need 2 or 3. Interestingly, there's no legal requirement for companies to offer specific breastfeeding breaks. They can legally state that you can only do this on your lunch break or in the kind of normal breaks that they offer. But of course, that's not very practical. And as I said, you can get engorgement if you don't pump. So it is important for companies to kind of be flexible about that. They also need to provide a space to pump. That can be the same sort of space where pregnant staff go to lie down and things like that, but it can't be a toilet because milk is a food. It can be stored in the fridge. It needs to be treated hygienically, so it has to be a safe, clean space. It can, of course, just be a meeting room though. But I think, again, with breastfeeding, it's very different depending on how you feel about it. Some are very confident about it and others aren't. And it's important to think about privacy, maybe put curtains, blinds in, maybe have a lock on the door or a sign on the door to say somebody's in there, anything that makes that person feel a bit more comfortable. And on the other end of the spectrum, public pumping is also fine. It's actually protected legally. It's seen in the same way as breastfeeding directly. So if you're pumping, you're legally entitled to do that in public. So of course, some may feel quite happy to do this at their desk or in a meeting room. I know that I actually got fed up with pumping because I couldn't do anything at the same time, and it took me about half an hour to do a full pump. So I'd get really annoyed just sitting there not being able to do anything. So because it interrupts your flow as well. You think, oh, I've got to pump between this sort of time. I'm right in the middle of something right now. So for me, I actually bought one of those wearable pumps, which you just put in your bra basically, and it just does it for you. But they are quite visible. They do make a bit of noise, those kind of things. So it's good for companies to educate the staff that may raise an eyebrow at this, because you shouldn't, but a lot of people who've been breastfeeding are used to this, that there are people out there that don't like it and they might make a comment about it. Companies need to be very protective of that, make sure that that there's nothing in the workplace that would make anybody feel uncomfortable about doing any of these things. It's just a normal thing that they need to do, and it needs to be supported. So baby's been born, baby's not feeding anymore, maybe child is growing up, going to school. How do we support parents generally in this sort of looking after of their children? So remote working, I probably don't need to say much about this actually, because we've all been doing it for the last year and a bit. And I hope that most of us have realized that it is a viable option, and it's a wonderful thing, that it isn't a secondary way of working. At least I don't think it is. And we work in technology. We should be embracing this more than most, because there are so many things that we can do to make this an easy choice for people. But remote working is so valuable if you're a parent. If you imagine that you can, negotiate to work at home, drop the kids off in the morning, take half an hour out to pick them up after school, and maybe shorten your lunch break to compensate for that. And that's a perfectly sort of valid way for somebody to work. And that gives them that freedom to be able to work and be a parent. I hope that the pandemic will make this a more common option. I think there are some companies out there that I know are still seeing this as a sort of less good way to work, but I really don't believe that. We've always done remote working at Snapping a Click. We most of us do hybrid. Most of us have, pre-pandemic, did a few days a week in the office and as much as you want at home, really. But for me personally, I work better at home. I go into the office because I want to talk to people, because I miss people. It's more for a social thing. I think I'm less productive in the office, but there's so many ways that you can make remote working a success. We do things like peer reviewing estimates. So if you've got a new hire in and you're worried that they might not be working hard enough or whatever, there are so many easy ways that you can keep an eye on that. You can ask them to do their task list, put their estimates in, get someone else that does a similar job to them to look over those estimates and see if they seem reasonable, and then just keep an eye on how it goes. We've worked with so many remote starters. We've only ever had one person that was problematic, and that became very apparent within the first 2 weeks. So it's nothing to be afraid of. It's a wonderful thing, and it really broadens who you can hire. Like the graphic I've got here, we're based in Brighton. If we could only bring people in to work in the office, our radius is very small. But we've worked with people all around the world, places like Brazil and Sri Lanka and all over the UK. And we found some amazing talent that way. So don't restrict your talent pool. It's a wonderful thing. It's not just for parents, it's for finding the right person for the job. Part-time, the gaming industry is really bad at part-time, I think, in general. There are a few roles you see from time to time. They tend to be more junior or admin. You don't tend to see things like a director or a senior or a lead position as part-time. And when you compare it to other industries that tend to have a lot more women in them, part-time is a much more normal thing. It's expected, it's offered. I see no reason not to let people work part-time. When we are planning projects aren't a perfect sort of, oh, you know, we've got this many people and this much time and everything fits perfectly. You know, it never works out like that. There are always periods where we have to have more people on the project or bring some contractors in. So I don't see why it would be difficult to accommodate half a person. You also have situations, especially actually with leads and directors, where they're not 100% assigned to a project. They might be overseeing multiple projects. So again, I can't see the issue. And some really big companies like Naughty Dog do co-leads. So they never have one lead, they always have multiple leads. So that's another option. You can assign 2 leads to a project if you're worried about that kind of coverage. Basically, I see no reason why we can't do this. It feels like such a barrier to a lot of people, and it shouldn't be something that, you know, if you have to go part-time and you're forced into a more junior role because of it, that seems really unfair to me. Just because you're not working full-time, that doesn't mean you're not learning and progressing and that you're not bringing something really valuable to that team. So I would love to see more part-time roles for senior people, because why not? Flexible work hours. So I've kind of touched upon this already, but letting people choose their own hours. And I really mean choose their own hours. Like, one of the sort of unintended consequences of the crunch debate is that a lot of studios market themselves as strictly 9 to 5, and that being a wonderful, positive thing. And I see their point, but it is a massive turn-off if you're a parent, because 9 to 5 means you can't pick the kids up from school. So I can see that there's a danger in not marketing yourself as 9 to 5, because it might look like you advocate crunch, but it is a problem, and I do think it does turn off especially a lot of women, because they think, well, I'm just not going to be able to work in this role because I need to fit it around my childcare. So, but one of the examples that I find interesting at Snap Finger Click is that we've always offered flexible work hours, and we've had requests from people, not even for parenting reasons at all, just because that's just what they prefer in their lives. We worked with a programmer a couple of years ago, and he asked if he could start his work at 3 a.m. purely because his partner worked nights. So he preferred to do his work at night so that they could spend more time together. And that was absolutely fine. I mean, we had no problem with that at all. I don't see why not. I mean, we had a very small crossover with him in the morning, I think about an hour, but it wasn't a problem. And I had a lot of problems with my daughter sleeping in the first couple of years of life. She was a very bad sleeper. And it was very common for her to wake up at 3 a.m. and not go back to sleep until she was ready for a nap, which would be, you know, sort of 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. And I just simply couldn't function where I would stay up with her and then try and stay awake. I had to go back to bed as well. So what I started to do was get up with her at 3 a.m., let her play with her toys or whatever, and I would just start work. I'd just do, you know, maybe 3 hours of work, 4 hours of work, whatever, then go back to bed for a bit, and then get up about lunchtime and do the rest of my day. And that would also be when everybody else was working. So we had that kind of crossover time. That worked for me. I don't know how I would have coped if I had a 9 to 5 job. It would have been very, very difficult. But you can, of course, still have core hours as well. And some companies who shy away from fully flexible, at least offering people things like, hey, you can turn up anytime between 7 and 10, and you can finish anytime between 3 and 6. You know, even those things can really help. And you've got those core hours where people can still have meetings and things like that. So there's lots that can be done here. It's very common for a parent to need time off, of course. You do legally have the right to request unpaid parental leave up to 4 weeks per year. The snag is that an employer can postpone this for up to 6 months. So it does make it difficult to control when you can actually do it. So, of course, not many people are able to do it. But it's worth remembering that kids only go to school for 38 weeks of the year. And even if you've got two parents and they can each take 4 weeks off, you've still got another 4 weeks to go that need to be covered. So I think it's good for companies to be understanding of this, to be flexible of this, to, especially if it's unpaid, just as long as it's planned and being aware of it and you've got enough notice, then to be kind about this, to let people kind of save up and say, I'm going to take an extra 4 weeks off in the summer, unpaid because my kid's off school. That's a nice thing to do. You're also entitled to emergency time off for dependents, but that's not always paid. And a good thing a company can do for this is just simply offer duvet days. And I don't know if most people probably know what a duvet day is, but that's basically a no questions asked day off. Could be because you're hungover, you're tired, you just don't feel like going to work that day. They're really useful for all sorts of situations. The boiler's broken, you've got an unexpected delivery showing up that you need to be in for, all of those kind of things. Everybody loves duvet days and they're super useful to parents. So very much in favor of adding duvet days as a benefit. I just want to talk a bit about company culture, because I think this is an important one and often gets overlooked, I think. But there's a lot of culture in the games industry that I think is a natural turn off to women, and also to a parent and anyone who's got a life kind of outside of the industry. A lot of social events in the games industry tend to be geared towards after work drinks, for example, Friday drinks. And I remember this in my 20s. I loved it. I went every week. I thought it was wonderful. And the other thing I've noticed about those Friday drinks culture is how valuable it was to catch a manager that you've had trouble, wanting to talk to. They're really great for progressing your career. You have a little chat with, one of the company directors and tell them your ideas, and they get a chance to see more of you. But if you only do these things on Friday nights, then the people who can't go miss out on all those opportunities, and they miss out on the chance to just bond and build relationships with their team. I think it's really important to offer a range of social activities, to do things at lunchtime, to have like mornings off, afternoons off, a whole days off, to do things with the team, and to do a range of different things that doesn't just involve drinking. Because of course, Generation Z are drinking less than millennials, for example. So not everybody wants to go out drinking and hang out with a bunch of drunk people. Let's do other things, lunch, cinema, paintballing, day trips to Thorpe Park, whatever. Let's do a range of things that we can involve people in, so that everybody gets a chance to do something they enjoy. I'm going to be slightly controversial here and talk about game jams, because I know game jams are really popular, but they're a nightmare if you're a parent, and they're becoming very popular with bigger companies as well. They obviously kind of started as this more indie thing for students, but now bigger, more mainstream game developers are committing to having game jams, once a year, twice a year. And that's great, but it's a problem. I mean, if it was for me, say, starting at a new studio, I'm a designer, and I think I would be expected to go to a game jam, and it would be quite detrimental to the company and to me if I didn't. But in order to kind of, in order for me to participate, if it was for a week, say, I'd have to ask my partner, you're going to have to look after our daughter every day until 11 o'clock this week, or whatever it's going to be. That would be very challenging, and for anybody that's got any sort of commitment outside of work, it's challenging. So I think doing a personal development week instead of branding it as a game jam is a better idea. That can still involve game jams. People can still form little groups and build a game if that's what they want to do, but you can also let people do other things, like maybe do some tutorials or go on a course, or maybe build a thing that they've always wanted to do, they've just never had time to do, or maybe just catch up on something that's always been bottom of their to-do list. Anything that benefits that person's career growth and therefore benefits the company in some way. I think that's what it should be. The whole point of it is that you're accepting that everyone's going to take a week off to do something that benefits the company. It shouldn't necessarily be this one thing. Again, you know, some people don't like game jams as well. We used to have enforced game jams at one of my companies, and a lot of people just used to take the week off on holiday because it just wasn't for them. You know, it was nothing to do with parenting. So it is good, again, to consider the different personalities and the people that are involved in this, and do something that works for everybody. And of course, language and job adverts is really important. This is something I've been very passionate about at Snapfingerclick, trying to make those job adverts a bit more accessible to people who aren't just, you know, young and into gaming. It's like, we want to attract people from different backgrounds. I like to make sure that we post jobs on non-games websites a lot, because I really value the input of, we've hired a lot of people that haven't come from games, and I really value their input, because that's how we get different ideas and different opinions. So it is important to look at that, get a variety of people to look at the job advert, to give feedback, to make sure that we're not unintentionally kind of excluding people with that classic language, you know, like, we're rock stars, you know, that kind of stuff that can be quite off-putting. So everything I've kind of talked about, you know, the focus of this talk has been on parents, but I do believe it's useful for a lot of people. Everything in terms of the flexible working practices is going to benefit people with limited mobility, chronic illnesses, mental health conditions, and carers who may be looking after a parent or a sibling. All of those people will benefit from these same working practices. And I think it's also just good for general staff morale. You know, it may be that you have no interest in becoming a parent. It doesn't, you know, this is just not on your plans at all, but knowing that your company cares about people, that it offers these benefits, and benefits that you yourself can also take part in, like duvet days and things like that. I think that's always a good thing, that the staff feel looked after, and that they know they're working for a company that actually cares about them and wants to make it work, and always employ the best people and find a way to make it work, that's willing to be flexible towards them, because you never know what's on the horizon. You never know what tomorrow might bring. You may find yourself in a sudden situation where you can't work a normal 9-to-5 job, and suddenly you need help from your company in order to do that. I think that benefits everybody. There's nobody who's going to be against this, you know. But it's all well and good me saying all these things. You know, we're all sitting here maybe hopefully agreeing, but if we aren't a company director, how do we make these changes? It's really hard, of course, to get other companies to introduce these policies. So I think the main thing is to keep talking about it, keep telling people about it. Whenever I get a chance to talk to decision makers at other companies, I try and bring this stuff up and tell them how important it is and how much it matters. We should be sharing our success stories all the time, letting people know that it can be done, that it isn't going to be detrimental to the company in any way. Big companies, of course, can be scared of making too many changes at once, and there's no need for them to make too many changes at once. They can do small steps. Things like the flexible work hours, they can start with core hours. It doesn't have to be full on choose your own hours. Things like remote work, it doesn't have to be full remote. They can start with letting people take, you know, a few days at home a week and things like that. It doesn't have to be one, you know, all or nothing. And I think kind of lobbying your company and saying, you know, I've heard about this thing, it would be nice if you did this thing, and just gradually get them to open up to different ideas. I think it's really important that men speak up. You know, this talk is about parents. It's not just about women, but women are sort of disproportionately affected by it because they tend to become the primary caregivers. I know men care about this stuff, and I think paradoxically men feel less able to speak up about it than women, because they're surrounded by other men who may be parents who never spoke up about it, who haven't requested to have more time at home with their kids. And I think that we need men to speak up too. We are still outnumbered as women in the industry, and the more of us that speak up, the better. We can't just be a lone voice in this. So I think we need to normalize that. And I know how important it is to a lot of men that they don't get to see their kids. My partner has been home this whole pandemic, and he's just loved spending all that time with his daughter. It is important. So yeah, have the kind of courage to speak up and come forward, and we can do this together. And the last little point is just about games events. Like, I'm here now doing a remote talk at Limit Break. I couldn't do Limit Break actually the first year because it was in London. And I'm so happy that I can do it now. I don't think I'd have been able to do it if it didn't go remote. And it's a wonderful thing. The pandemic has kind of pushed us into a lot of these changes, but I think a lot of them are changes for the better. And I've always been quite ballsy about games events since having my daughter. I've just taken her to games events because why not? And it's funny, I took her to develop when she was 5 weeks old. And I couldn't get the buggy up the stairs. There was no lift actually that could take you to the floor that the talks were on and the expo and everything. And I remember asking about it, and it was, oh, you know, we can do it, but it's a bit of a hassle. We need sort of notice in advance. And it really made me realize that it's not just because I had a buggy. If you're in a wheelchair, for example, it wasn't very accessible. And those things just feel so unacceptable in 2021. It's like, games events should be accessible to everybody, including parents. So yeah, we need to, you know, us parents, we should be taking our kids to these events and questioning why we can't, you know, because why not? They're just games events. They're supposed to be fun and enjoyable. So that's the end of my slides. What I'd like to do now is just kind of open things up for a bit of an interactive Q&A. I've got a few questions that I'd like to put to people as well, and I'm sure there are some questions that everybody watching has. So let's start from the top then. Are there work from home specific support companies can offer new parents, or is it not hugely different from being at an office? Yeah, I think that's an interesting one, isn't it? And it's come up a lot in the pandemic because we at SnapFingerClick have always provided laptops, but we haven't really, well, we've done laptops and routers, but that's sort of on request. But I think it's an interesting question, isn't it? It's things like, should we be providing internet connections? Should we be providing better sort of furniture and things like that? Because I've been just sort of sitting on my sofa, probably terrible posture for the last year. Yeah, I think it's a good point. Maybe companies should be doing more, and I guess that's not just related to parenting. But yeah, I do think, yeah, as work from home becomes a more normal thing, perhaps it is something the company should discuss in advance. You know, do you have I have seen as well sometimes with remote companies, it's a condition of the job that they have their own equipment and things like that as well. But I'm not sure how I feel about that, because I think also having your own equipment, that can be a bit risky in terms of like security as well, because we've worked with big publishers and I don't think they would have been happy if people were just using their own laptops and things. We did recently do another scheme. Somebody wanted a new computer, but he wanted it for his own use as well. Like, he wanted it to be powerful enough to play games like way above the specs that would be necessary for work. So what we actually agreed was to part fund it. So he had to fund some of it himself and we funded some of it, and then we bought it outright for him, like the company bought it, and then he just has to kind of pay it back in installments, no interest or anything like that. So that was another option that we did. But yeah, I think generally I do think we should be looking into more support, especially coming out of the pandemic. I think it's going to be just a normal thing, not just because of parenting, but for, you know, for the fact that we've all kind of experienced it now and know that it can be done. So it's something companies are going to have to start considering, because you don't want to risk somebody getting like a back problem, for example, from working at home. You know, where does the law stand on all these things? I don't really know. But I think it's going to become a big thing that companies are going to have to start considering more. Do pregnant people get told about all their rights when they inform the employer, or do they have to find them out themselves? Well, I think it varies. I don't think companies are necessarily even aware of all the rules, actually, like things like the space to lie down in it. Weirdly enough, we happen to have a space already at SnapFingerClick, but and I did make use of it because I was tired, so I just said I'm going for a nap on the sofa. But no, I don't think they do. I mean, I don't believe there is I don't believe there's a law that they have to be told all their rights. I think certainly not from what I've experienced. I don't know if I want to caveat, I'm not like an employment law expert or anything. This is just from me doing research. So I don't know is the short answer, but I know that people don't get told this all the time, whether or not that's that's the way it should be. I'm not sure, but I do think there's a lot that people aren't aware of. I think especially things like, as well, the right to have time off to go exercising and things like that when you're pregnant. I wasn't aware of that. That's interesting, because I wouldn't have thought you would be allowed to request that. But yeah, I think it's important. But the fact is, as well, is that a lot of these rights, these basic rights, pregnancy is not too bad, but like maternity rights, they're pretty bare bones. And I think any decent company tends to offer something better. So really, it's not so much about what your rights are according to the law. I think it's about all the benefits that you're entitled to and making the staff aware of that. The company should be doing better than what the basic law is, and they should be communicating these things to people so that they're aware and that they know that they're not going to have any problems or hassle with things that they might feel uncomfortable about, like breastfeeding or like morning sickness or things like that. So I think it's good to, if somebody says, I'm pregnant, then the company should be able to provide them with some sort of, handbook or part of the handbook that's relevant to them, that shows them all the things they're entitled to. That should be a thing. I definitely think. I think the feeling is, when you haven't been pregnant before, you don't know what's normal, and you don't like to talk about it. You don't want to be seen as weak and like, oh, I'm a burden, and because obviously it's not just women, but it is something that disproportionately affects women. And if you already feel like any sign of weakness can put you at a disadvantage, anything that means you can't work as many hours as your male colleagues, anything that makes you more demanding than your male colleagues, all of these things, it matters. And I know, even though I felt pretty comfortable at my company when I was pregnant, there were still things that I wasn't sure how to navigate, like the sickness. I just didn't really know what to do. I didn't feel comfortable discussing it. I didn't want to tell people, oh, it makes me feel sick. I didn't want to talk about that kind of stuff. By the time I got to breastfeeding, that I was personally okay with that. But I can imagine, thinking back to other jobs that I've worked in the past, I can imagine some people being a bit weirded out by me pumping at my desk. It's like those kind of things. And I think understanding your rights and being told, I can say I'm allowed to do this, that can make all the difference. And like being able to kind of stand up for yourself and just help with normalizing it as well. Because I feel like in some ways, maybe I've been part of the problem when I was pregnant, because I wasn't speaking up enough. I wasn't normalizing it enough at the time. It's like now I'm speaking up and I'm doing my best. But for everyone that comes after me, I hope they feel in a better place where they can share their feelings without feeling scared or worried that it's going to harm their career. So yeah, it's it would definitely be really valuable to help people in any way that we can. Do new parents worry about a professional gap, like being out of practice from their job for so long? Should companies support them to skill up again? Yeah, I think that's a really big one. That's certainly something I worried about. Even just being on maternity leave, it's like that feeling that you're getting left behind, that you're missing out, that you're losing out on things. I can imagine that must feel even harder if you do actually take a career break to raise a child. But I think what companies need to do is both. They should be supporting you to not have to take a career break if you don't want to, but also, welcoming you back. I don't know how common it is in the games. I can't recall ever working with somebody who's taken a long career break and then come back to games. I've not personally worked with anybody, and I've been in the industry 13 years. I must have worked with hundreds of people. So I think, again, it's just indicative of our industry. We are generally a young industry, and unfortunately older people don't tend to stick around, which is a big problem, I think, and a real shame. But yeah, I absolutely agree that we should be embracing, those people, helping them back to work and providing training if necessary, or whatever it is that they feel they need. Because when you think about things like, I remember when Unity started becoming a thing, and we pivoted at Relentless I was at the time, we pivoted from our own engine to working with Unity. So people were having to go from C++ to C#, for example. And it wasn't like we threw all our programmers out and said, oh, well, you don't know C#, so we don't want you. We gave people that time to get to grips with things and learn. And yeah, I mean, and that was the whole company all at once, you know, that was quite a big change, but it was seen as an important one. So we should be investing in people. If they've got a proven track record that they're good, absolutely we should. And there's certainly, if I was recruiting someone who'd been out of the industry for a while, I'd find that quite interesting, actually, because I do think we need people from different backgrounds. And if somebody's taken a career break and gone off and experienced something else for whatever reason, you know, whatever reason that may be, not just for becoming a parent, it's good to have their opinions, because I've always felt like showing games to people kind of with fresh eyes as well is always, especially the types of games I work in, because I work in kind of non-traditional games. I've always valued the opinions of people that aren't typical gamers, because they tend to have the most interesting feedback and insights. So that could also be seen as a benefit, you know, having come from not being in games for a while and coming back and, you know, actually seeing something without the biases and the sort of culture that we've currently got. That could also be quite beneficial. What else have we got? So does maternity rights differ when the employee is not in the same country? Oh, that's an excellent question, and I don't think I'm qualified to answer it, to be honest. I don't really know. I don't know if anybody here knows, because we have employed people outside of the UK, but I'm not quite sure how it works kind of legally from an admin point of view. We've never employed anybody permanently. It's always just been freelance. So I assume that makes a difference. I don't suppose anybody here knows the answer to that one. You probably go with the one that's got the most generous rights, just to cover yourself, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're breaking the law. But yeah, it's an interesting question. And I guess as we start having more remote work being a more common thing, it's going to become a bigger topic. So yeah, definitely something that companies will probably have to look into. Thoughts on childcare services on site, daycare related benefits? Yeah, I think some places already do this, right? Like much bigger companies, it's quite normal to have a creche. I think if the company is big enough to warrant that, I think that's a great thing. It sort of depends. I mean, one of the things I've thought about when I worked in London, I'm not sure I would have wanted to take my daughter on the train at rush hour. I think that would have been a problem for me. If it's somewhere that, you know, is more local, I think that would be good. But I think the thing with that is kind of logistic more than anything else. Do you have enough staff to warrant having an on-site creche? I think if the games industry had more parents in it, and then it becomes a more interesting option. But yeah, it's a great idea. It's just kind of, do we have enough people to make it a regular thing? In terms of other daycare related benefits, I suppose it'd be interesting if companies were willing to pay towards childcare, or maybe have a deal with a local nursery or something like that. All of those things could be really interesting. There are like government schemes that you can do. I didn't mention this actually, but if you can claim the tax back on childcare, which is quite useful because that saves you a bit of money. Not much, it's still more than my mortgage, but it helps. And once the child turns 3, you're entitled to a certain number of free hours each week as well. So that helps. But that's different throughout the UK. I think that's only England. I know it's different in Wales and Scotland. So but yeah, that would also be another thing that companies could do, is offer to help with childcare costs, certainly. I wanted to ask, what can we do to encourage our companies to take on more of these processes? Do we just try and raise this presentation to them? Are there any resources we can use for this? Yeah, I mean, I'm happy for this presentation to be shared outside of Limit Break. In terms of getting companies to do it, yeah, I think there's different ways. Like, it depends on your company. You know, if you've got a big corporation and you don't get to kind of, you know, talk directly to the decision makers, it can be challenging. But I think there are often moments where you get a chance to raise some of these points. It's not really relevant to parenting, but I do remember when I left one of my previous companies, I got to do an exit interview. And I remember thinking, you know, there's something that I've been meaning to bring up for a long time, and I haven't really had the opportunity to do it, so I'm just going to do it now because I'm leaving, so I don't care. And one of the things that really bothered me was that on Fridays, we would have, of course, the beer Friday, as we always do in the industry, and it was literally just beer. It was only beer. There was nothing else, beer or tea. And I like wine, so I just used to go and buy myself a box of red wine and kept it under my desk. But I remember putting in the exit interview, I think it's a bit restricted. I also think it's a bit laddish to only offer beer. I think you should offer wine. And other refreshments, other non-alcoholic ones too, like maybe getting some nice soft drinks and things like that. That would be a nice thing to do. And then the HR manager actually came running down and was like, "You're so right, I'm so sorry, and you know what, it's your last day on Friday, we're going to get some lovely wine in." And it was like, a lot of it, I don't believe is companies being deliberately mean. I think a lot of it is companies being ignorant. They just haven't thought about it. And stuff like that Beer Friday thing is such a perfect example, because it's like, hey, we all drink beer, don't we? That's what we do. Nobody's ever really thought to question it. So sometimes it's just as simple as an email and pointing these things out. Often, in bigger companies, they do the employee kind of feedback forms. There's often a chance to raise things there. But I think with big companies, it's small steps. I think if you go in kind of gung-ho and say, we should be doing all of these things, then you're less likely to get any change. But suggesting things gradually, start small, work your way up, tell your immediate line manager to feed them back. If you get a chance at the party with the drunken company director, mention things. All of those things can help. And I think, especially if you're not a parent and you're speaking kind of on behalf of others, that's always a nice thing to do as well. Because if you're speaking at it from a point of observing and saying, I think we could do better for our parents, I think in some ways they listen to you more, because it's how you're coming across as a company. If it's the parent themselves doing that, then there can be a bit of, sometimes companies can be a bit defensive, where they're like, oh, well, you would say that, wouldn't you? Because, that's what you need. But if it's someone who's kind of neutral in the situation, saying, I really think we could do more, perhaps there was someone that you used to work with that is a parent now, and they wouldn't come to your company with the current rules that you have, things like that. All of those things can help. But it's not easy trying to make these changes, and especially me working at a small studio, I have even less power over big companies. But I think every little thing that we can do can help. So I don't think I ever gave it a second thought until I had a child, and I feel sad about that, because all the people that were potentially being excluded from the industry, it's a shame. There's some really good people out there. They shouldn't be kind of, it should still be an option for them to be in games, just because they're parents. And actually, I've worked on kids games, and the amount of trouble we've had trying to get sort of feedback and knowing, are we making the right game? Because nobody on the team was a parent. Nobody had a child that they could kind of, say, oh, well, my kid would do this or that. It's like just trying to guess. And all of those things are so important. It really helps just to make better games, to get that sort of range of experience and background. So yeah, it's really important. Hey Joe, to have a child, I'm going to need to do IVF or adoption. First off, should I tell my employer when I start the process? And secondly, does the company have to give me time off for these things legally? Where could I go out to find the legal side of this? So again, I'm going to caveat it with, I'm not a specialist in this, but from what I've researched, and what I'll do after this actually is I will post a couple of links of the pages that I looked at to read up about this. So my understanding is, so for IVF, for any kind of like fertility side, you may be able to get time off, but it's not guaranteed. Like, you might be able to get it treated as a medical appointment, and it depends how your company treats that. Most companies do give medical appointments off paid, but they don't have to. Most do. But it may depend on the nature of your appointments. If it's for yourself, then that's probably more straightforward. If it's for a surrogate, for example, then it might be less straightforward. But what I would recommend telling your employer about it, because as I said earlier, I do think a lot of this is just ignorance on the company's part, that they just haven't really thought about it. So for what I was saying earlier in the presentation about just just offering 2 weeks paid leave, or up to 2 weeks, is not like 2 weeks straight, but up to 10 days leave for things like fertility, for things like adoption and surrogacy, is quite a small gesture. In terms specifically for adoption and surrogacy, from what I understand, once you're matched with a child for adoption, then you do have rights to time off, but I don't think you have rights to paid time off, but you do have rights to request time off for meetings and transferring of the child. And then of course, once you get the child, then you can take maternity and paternity leave. In terms of surrogacy, there's obviously going to be things before you get matched with a surrogate. So there might be meetings and interviews and things. There's no legal right to any time off for that. But once you're matched with a surrogate, you do have the right to take, I think it's up to 2 days off for appointments like scans. But again, those don't have to be paid. So my recommendation would be to discuss it with them, because I would hope that most employers would be sympathetic to this and would agree to giving you that time off, as they should. I wish this was in UK law. Some other countries are starting to do it, but basically what I suggested in my talk was based on what some other companies are doing, because I think Channel 4 was the one that I read about, that they were giving 2 weeks off for a variety of reasons in terms of becoming a parent, and things like fertility, surrogacy, adoption. That was one of the things that it covered. Okay, so that was the last question in the chat. Does anybody else have anything they wanted to bring up? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I haven't really felt that. I think maybe, I wonder if it's more the fact that it's just female game designers are maybe, I don't remember meeting many of them when I first started in the industry. There was quite a lot of artists, very few programmers as well. And I wonder if it's more a symptom of the fact that game design has you only really started to see more women in it in more recent times. Because when I was at my first company, we had one other woman join us very briefly for a few months. But apart from that, it was men all the way through. How many would it have been? Maybe 20, 25 in total, probably something like that. And then even when I went to my company after that, which was in, when was that, 2015? Yeah. Again, there was only one other woman on the design team out of, I think there was about 6 or 7 of us. So I wonder if that's more of an issue, because when I started in the industry, there wasn't many women, but the ones that there were mostly artists and producers, I think. So that would be my guess. But it is an interesting question, because I do think there are some roles that are harder to do, say, at home, or to do flexibly. Like QA, for example, I think is a challenging one, because you might need specialist equipment, and you might not be able to kind of do that in your own hours, because if you need to test a build to release it to go off for submission, for example, then that would be very time dependent, and there would be more challenges there to support people in those kind of roles. Anything that's kind of customer facing as well, I think would be not so difficult to do from home, but might be difficult to do in irregular hours potentially. But yeah, there are some big challenges that would need to be overcome. And it would be good to definitely think about how we can overcome them, because I certainly think not all disciplines are easy to fill. But it might also be a bit of a negative loop in a way, because I think, so when I joined the industry, like artists, producers, there was more women there than other disciplines. And if you've had that also then means you're more likely to have a leader, a woman leader in those disciplines, who's more likely to have become a parent potentially. So therefore it's more likely to make it easier for others within that group to then do the same thing. Whereas if you're coming into a discipline that hasn't historically had many women leaders, then you're also going to struggle, because they haven't set up ways that they can work flexibly or work from home or continue their career, or even advocate for them, fight for them. I think all of those things combined, and what you said about the youngness of the games industry, and the fact that, you know, a lot of women have joined. As I said at the start, it was 4% in 2008. So bad. And it's gone up a lot, but that can only suggest to me that most women who've joined since then are going to be younger than me, and therefore haven't become parents yet. So we're reaching a point where this is going to become a bigger issue, but it hasn't been a problem that many companies have had to face yet. Even just generally people going on maternity leave, I think there are many games companies out there that haven't had to face this as an issue. It's just not even kind of happened. They haven't really ever been faced with it. So, and when you compare it to, you know, when I talk to my friends who don't work in the industry, and it's just incredible the difference. Like one of my friends works for an advertising agency, so lots of women, mostly women, and yeah, it's just a standard. You're offered part-time, not a problem. She can kind of fit all her hours. She basically does 9:30 till 2:30 every day, so she's part-time, and it's all fine, and everything is just set up to do that. The company she didn't have to negotiate with anybody. It was just a question they asked, like, so what do you want to do when you come back? Full-time, part-time? How do you want to do it? It was all just assumed that would be the case. Those industries have had to adapt because of the number of women working for them. There's no way that they can have hostile policies for maternity. They just can't. They would collapse without the support of those women. And because the games industry has historically been able to survive with young men running the show, these problems haven't had to be solved. And it's only now that it's starting to become more apparent, and there's still so much work to be done, I think, in changing things. So we continue to try and make those changes, I think. Great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. I think it's been a really nice little chat as well. I've really enjoyed everybody's input, and yeah, just thanks for watching, and I hope it's given everybody some things to think about, some ideas. See you all again soon, and enjoy the rest of your evening.